spring of 1998, 2-year-old Emma Gibson seemed to evaporate into thin air from her front lawn in rural Oregon. Her father, a county deputy, was miles away on a run. Search parties scoured the meadows, dragged the rivers, and tore through the surrounding timber for days. No tracks, no clothing fibers, no blood. Absolute zero to explain where she went. The truth was buried, taking 3 years to finally emerge through the whispers of a toddler. How does a child disappear from a fenced yard the size of a postage stamp in broad daylight under the protection of a man whose job is to track the lost? Azalea, Oregon, is a quiet outpost in the Douglas County hills, a community that survived the death of the timber industry and learned to endure the silence. That March morning, the Gibson household woke to a day that felt deceptively normal, the kind that gives no warning before it destroys everything. Their home sat at the end of a gravel track, a single-story structure with a modest fenced lot and a swing set that listed to the left. Larry Gibson, 34, was a sheriff's deputy, known around town as steady and sharp-edged, the guy you trusted when things went sideways. That morning, Judith managed the kitchen while the kids drifted through the living room. It was Larry's day off, and he planned a pre-lunch run to clear his mind. Judith just nodded at the sink. It was their routine. He ran to stay focused. She kept the domestic engine running, and the children found their own spaces to occupy. A cartoon murmured from the TV in the back room. Outside, the creek bordering their land babbled over slick rocks. Emma was already outside when Larry stepped onto the porch to lace up his sneakers. The yard wasn't big, barely 20 feet to the low wooden fence, but to a blonde toddler with wide eyes, it was a vast kingdom. The grass was still heavy with dew, and her shoes left faint trails as she pushed a toy truck in careful lines across the green. Larry leaned on the rail, watching his daughter for a beat. Judith shouted that Karen would be out shortly to babysit. Larry promised a quick 2-miler, nothing out of the ordinary. He wore his service pistol on his hip, a habit common among Douglas County deputies who never quite switched off cop mode. He double-checked the gate latch, told Emma to wait for her sister, and jogged down the drive. The kid looked up, waved a chubby hand, and chirped something like, "Bye, Daddy." Her voice was clear and sweet, ringing like a bell in the morning chill. The road wound past open pastures before curving toward a dark wall of pines. Larry hit his stride, zoning out, letting the rhythm take over. Half a mile out, he caught motion in a ditch. A gray cat, the neighbor's stray that had been raiding his trash for weeks. He'd reported it, even called the Humane Society, but nobody drove this far out for strays. In this part of Oregon, you solved your own problems. Larry slowed, unholstered his .45 Colt, and fired a single round at the ditch. The crack shattered the silence, scattering crows from a fence post. He paused, saw no movement, and reholstered. A minor nuisance, dealt with and forgotten in a heartbeat. He kept running. The run dragged on longer than planned. The road dipped into marshland and climbed toward the shadowed forest ridge. The air smelled of wet bark and pine resin. He turned back after about 2 miles. When he reached his driveway, breaking a light sweat, his watch read 12:15 p.m. Judith was on the porch, hand shielding her eyes from the glare. Her voice hit him before he reached the stairs, sharp and panicked. "Larry, do you have her?" He froze, chest heaving. "Who?" "Emma. She's gone. I can't find her." He thought it was a sick joke. The yard looked exactly as The swing was still. The toy truck lay sideways in the grass. The gate was cracked open a fraction. He shouted her name, then louder. Nothing answered but the wind in the trees. He tore through the property, under the porch, the shed, the gap behind the woodpile. Judith ran the ditch line, screaming into the brush. They circled the house until their voices were raw. Finding nothing, Larry grabbed his patrol car keys and tore up the road, horn blaring, shouting out the window. He hit the intersection, screamed at the empty air, and doubled back. Judith was sobbing on the porch, shaking apart. At 12:55 p.m., they finally dialed the sheriff. The dispatcher was professionally cool. 2-year-old female, last seen in yard, blonde, blue eyes. By 1:30, the cavalry arrived. A volunteer fireman pulled in, followed by neighbors, church folks, and Larry's Boy Scout troop. Strangers who heard the scanner traffic showed up. Within an hour, cars lined the road. A command post went up by the mailbox. K-9 units arrived, the dogs working in methodical loops. They caught a scent at the gate, tracked it 50 yards down the road, and then nothing. The trail evaporated at the pavement. State police choppers buzzed the treetops. Men waded through the freezing creek and combed the tall grass. The afternoon blurred into chaos. Judith was on autopilot, answering the same questions, pointing to the spot where Emma last stood. Larry paced the perimeter in his running gear, stone-faced. When deputies asked for a timeline, he said 45 minutes total. They wrote it down. By 4 p.m., the grid covered 2 miles. Barns searched. Areas taped off. 0 results. No shoe, no print, no snapped twig. As the sun dropped, the temperature plummeted. Coffee circulated in paper cups. Someone offered Judith a bed in town. She refused. She'll come back here. She insisted. Larry went inside and changed into his full uniform. He told a buddy he needed to feel in control. Judith didn't look at him. Teams searched the woods until the sheriff called a halt at 6 p.m. "We resume at dawn," he told the exhausted crowd. Someone placed Emma's toy truck on the railing for safekeeping. The cars left. The silence returned, heavier than before. Judith stood on the porch, freezing. Larry stood guard, scanning the dark. The house lights burned behind them. Inside, lunch sat rotting on paper plates. The swing creaked. They didn't speak. Their world had shrunk to that patch of grass, and the suffocating quiet was louder than any scream. Maps lay on a patrol car hood, marked with red circles that yielded nothing. Dawn on March 19th brought a fresh grid. Deputies, volunteers, and Mormons joined the hunt. Larry's scouts marched in lines through the brush, calling Emma's name. By morning, 100 people were out there. Choppers flew low, horses muddy from the riverbanks, but the fog swallowed every shout. Larry was efficient, holding a clipboard, managing zones. Friends saw a pro doing his job. Strangers saw something cold. Judith wouldn't leave the house, scanning every car for news. None came. By noon, the sheriff expanded the radius. Larry agreed, changed clothes, and reappeared in a pristine uniform, badge shining. It was odd, deputies whispered. One wrote, "Gibson is unusually composed, lacks normal emotion. Claims it's for the cameras." Portland news crews arrived. Larry faced them, confident. "Every minute counts," he stated. Emotionless, Judith stood by, trembling and mute. The search spread like a stain. Wells, sheds, ditches. Night searches found footprints, but none small enough. Only the toy truck remained. The sheriff's office built a timeline. Larry said he left at 11:30, returned at 12:15. Judith said 12:30. The call was at 12:55. That left a 3-5-minute gap, and the car Larry drove his patrol sedan. He put 7 unaccounted miles on it. He claimed he drove to a rest area to check for Emma. The sheriff noted it. Then, the cat story cracked. Larry said he fired once and missed. Investigators checked the ditch. They found the cat dead 50 yards out. 2 bullets, head and chest. Ballistics matched Larry's gun. A detective nodded. People miss and people lie, but rarely both with physical proof. The massive search scaled back. The tip line brought false hope. Sightings in stores and rest stops, all dead ends. Then, 4-year-old Karen spoke up. In an interview, she claimed a truck pulled in while Dad was jogging. A blonde woman and a dark-haired man. They took Emma, she whispered. They drove away. She described an old, tan, or gold truck. She didn't know them. They didn't speak. Detectives wrote it down. No tire tracks. No other witnesses. But the description went out. Tan pickup. 2 suspects. That image plastered Oregon for weeks. The tan truck became a phantom haunting the Pacific Northwest. In the weeks following the statement, dispatchers were flooded with calls. Every beat-up Ford or Chevy rolling through rural Oregon became a suspect vehicle. Every couple passing through town was scrutinized with suspicion. But like the scent trail the dogs lost on the asphalt, the truck led nowhere. It was a ghost ship, drifting through the case file, offering a convenient villain that nobody could find. Behind the scenes, the investigation into Larry Gibson was quietly turning dark. The grieving father narrative was fracturing under the weight of physical evidence, or the lack of it. Detectives brought Larry in for a polygraph. He sat in the chair, hooked up to the machine, the same stone-faced deputy who had directed search teams with a clipboard. The results were inconclusive on key questions, specifically regarding his timeline. But polygraphs aren't court-admissible. And Larry knew that better than anyone. He walked out of the station, badge still shiny, while his colleagues watched with a growing, gnawing pit in their stomachs. The inconsistencies in his story were becoming impossible to ignore. The timeline gap of 35 minutes, the 7 unaccounted miles on his patrol car, and the cat. Why lie about shooting a stray? One investigator theorized that the gunshot was the catalyst. Perhaps an accident, a ricochet, a moment of careless rage. If the gunshot killed the cat, it proved he was firing a weapon within feet of where his daughter was playing. If he lied about the cat to cover up a different target, the implications were monstrous. But without a body, the district attorney wouldn't move. They were paralyzed. The seasons turned. The yellow ribbon tied to the Gibson's oak tree faded to white in the sun and rotted in the rain. Judith Gibson became a ghost in her own home. She stopped leaving the house, stopped answering the phone. The town of Azalea watched the marriage disintegrate from a distance. Larry eventually transferred to a desk job, the whispers following him down the precinct hallways. He was the man who lost his daughter, or the man who got away with it. Nobody knew which version was true. The case went cold. Deep freeze. 3 years passed. The file gathered dust in a basement archive, a box full of dead ends, and a yellow toy truck, tagged as evidence. Then came March 2001. Karen Gibson, now 7 years old, was in therapy. The trauma of losing her sister had left her anxious and withdrawn. During a session involving play therapy, the psychologist gently steered the conversation back to that morning in 1998. She asked about the truck. She asked about the man and the woman. Karen stopped playing. She looked at the floor, her hands twisting in her lap. The trembling voice of a child finally broke the 3-year silence. "There was no truck," she whispered. The psychologist froze. "What do you mean, Karen?" I didn't see a lady." "Why did you say you did?" "Because Daddy told me to." The revelation hit the sheriff's department like a shockwave. The tan truck, the lead that had consumed thousands of man-hours and diverted the entire investigation, was a fabrication, a script planted in the mind of a 4-year-old by the very man sworn to uphold the law. Armed with this new testimony, investigators reopened the file with a vengeance. They looked at the map again, the 7 miles on the odometer. They drew a circle with a 3.5-mile radius from the Gibson driveway, the distance a car could travel out and back. It encompassed deep ravines, logging roads, and old wells. They realized Larry hadn't gone for a run to clear his head. The theory shifted. Something happened in the yard. An accident with the car? A firearm discharge? A fit of rage? The 3-5-minute gap wasn't missing time. It was cleanup time. The 7 miles weren't a search. They were a disposal run. They brought Larry Gibson back in. This time, the interrogation room felt different. The brother-in-blue courtesy was gone. They laid out the mileage. They laid out the ballistics from the cat. And they played the recording of his surviving daughter admitting the lie. Larry didn't break. He didn't cry. He sat with that same unnerving flat affect he had displayed on the front porch 3 years prior. He invoked his right to counsel and shut his mouth. Without a body, without a confession, and with the only witness being a child who had now recanted her previous testimony, the DA faced a nightmare scenario. They had a mountain of circumstantial smoke, but no fire. They searched the 3-5-mile radius again. They dug up suspected sites. They drained a pond. Nothing. The earth has a way of keeping secrets. In Douglas County, the dense pines and the shifting soil of the logging hills can swallow a secret forever. To this day, Emma Gibson remains missing. Larry Gibson left the force and moved out of state, living a quiet life under the shadow of a cloud that never lifted. Judith divorced him and moved away, trying to outrun the memory of the empty yard. The case technically remains open, a suspended active investigation, but in the quiet corners of Azalea, the locals don't look for a tan truck anymore. They look at the old logging roads and the deep, silent woods, wondering where the frantic drive of a desperate father actually ended. The truth is out there, buried under 20 years of pine needles and silence. And a little girl's voice, once sweet as a bell, is just a memory on the wind.